We have forgotten what they knew 1,000 years ago, and without it, we will not survive. We build cities of concrete and glass, but we cannot read the signs that nature writes in the clouds and on the leaves of trees. We accumulate things, but we lose touch with each other, locking ourselves in individual apartments. The indigenous peoples of America had a philosophy where survival was not a struggle against nature, but harmony with it, where the strength of society was more important than the strength of the individual. Their lessons are not just ancient knowledge, but instructions for survival that are more relevant today than ever. Watch this video to the end, and you will learn how the principle of the seventh generation could change our modern world beyond recognition. What if I told you that trees can talk and clouds can predict the future? Indigenous peoples did not just live in the forest, they were part of its nervous system, understanding a language that we have long since stopped hearing. For them, every branch, every stone, and every movement of the wind was filled with meaning. They saw the direction of moss growth on a tree not just as a botanical fact, but as a reliable compass pointing north. The shape of clouds was not a random pattern to them, but an accurate weather forecast for the coming hours. This ability to read the sky allowed them to prepare for storms or droughts long before they began. They judged the coming changes in nature, which were invisible to the human eye, by the behavior of animals. The alarming cry of a bird could mean the approach of a predator or a stranger. It was a continuous reading of information from the surrounding world. Observing subtle changes in the color of leaves or the water level in a stream gave them an idea of the health of the entire ecosystem. They knew when to harvest wild plants and when to leave them alone to recover. This wisdom was the basis of their sustainable existence. They could distinguish dozens of shades of silence in the forest, where every pause and every rustle had its own meaning. A sudden lull could be a more alarming sign than a loud noise. It was the art of listening not with their ears, but with their whole being. Even footprints on the ground were an open book to them, telling them who had passed by, when, and for what purpose. From the depth of the imprint, they could determine weight and speed of movement. This knowledge was critical for both hunting and safety. This connection with nature was not a set of superstitions, but the result of thousands of years of observation, passed down from generation to generation. From an early age, every child learned to see the world as a single whole, where everything is interconnected. This was their main advantage in survival. They did not oppose themselves to nature, but sought to become an integral part of it. Their philosophy was to go with the flow of life, not fight it. This was the secret of their resilience. Modern man looks at a forest and sees only trees. The indigenous people saw it as a home, a pharmacy, a pantry, and a sacred place all at once. This fundamental difference in perception is the first lesson we must learn. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. Do you think it's possible for modern city dwellers to restore at least some of this lost connection with nature? Let me know in the comments. Want to know the secret that allowed one hunt to feed an entire tribe for months? For the peoples of the Great Plains, the bison was not just game, but the center of their universe, the foundation of their economy, culture, and way of life. The philosophy of using everything reached its peak here, turning hunting into a sacred ritual of thrift. After a successful hunt, the painstaking work began, where no part of the huge animal went to waste. The meat was cut into thin strips and dried in the sun, turning it into jerky, a light, nutritious food that could be stored for months. It was their strategic reserve for winter and long journeys. Some of the dried meat was mixed with melted fat and wild berries to make pemmican. This high-calorie product was a real energy concentrate, indispensable on military campaigns or during long journeys. Just one small piece could sustain a warrior's strength for a whole day. The thick bison hide was used as a material for making teepees, mobile and durable dwellings, ideally suited to a nomadic lifestyle. It was also used to sew warm clothes, shoes, shields, and belts. The hide was a versatile material that protected against both the winter cold and the summer heat. Bones were used to make tools, scrapers for processing hides, awls, needles, and even knives. Large bones were used as frames for saddles or sleds. Bison brains were used to tan leather, making it soft and elastic. Horns were used to make spoons, ladles, powder flasks, and ritual headdresses. Hair and tails were used to make ropes, brushes, and jewelry. Even the contents of the stomach were used as containers for carrying water. The tendons, soaked and separated into thin fibers, were turned into strong threads. These threads were used to sew clothes and tip arrows. They were stronger than any plant fibers. The internal fat was melted down and used for cooking, as a preservative, and as a base for paints. It was also used as a protective cream against the sun and frost. Not a single gram of this valuable resource was wasted. Even bison dung, dried in the sun, served as fuel in the treeless prairies. It produced an even, hot flame, ideal for cooking. It was an example of absolute wastelessness. This attitude toward hunting was not simply a manifestation of thriftiness, but a deep respect for the spirit of the animal that gave its life for the people. It was believed that if the gift was not used in its entirety, the spirits would turn away and not send good luck on the next hunt. But survival depended not only on resources, but also on social engineering. What if I told you that the architecture of their homes was a tool for creating an indestructible community? I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the Iroquois social structure. Their dwelling, known as the Longhouse, was not just a building, but a living organism, the embodiment of their collectivist philosophy. It was a unique social technology that shaped society from within. The Longhouse was a long, up to 100-meter-long structure with a wooden frame covered with elm bark. There were no separate rooms inside. The space was divided into compartments for different families of the same clan. The absence of solid walls encouraged constant interaction and mutual assistance. Life in such a house was governed by strict rules based on respect and cooperation. Cooking, caring for the hearth, raising children, all of this was a collective responsibility. No one was ever left alone with their problems. The uniqueness of this system lay in the fact that kinship was traced through the maternal line. Women were the heads of families and guardians of the home. When men married, they moved into their wife's home, and their status depended largely on the respect they showed to her family. It was women who owned the land and distributed the harvest. This gave them enormous economic and political power. Without their approval, men could not go on military campaigns, as it was women who decided whether the warriors would have provisions. The oldest woman of the clan, or clan mother, was the main authority in the house. She settled disputes, kept order, and preserved traditions. Her wisdom and experience were the key to the well-being of the entire extended family. This structure created incredibly strong social bonds. Resources, whether food or firewood, were shared and distributed as needed. No one could go hungry while their neighbor had surplus. The Longhouse was a school of collectivism. From birth, people learned that the well-being of the group was more important than personal ambitions. Selfishness and greed simply had no place here. This model of society was incredibly stable. It allowed the Iroquois to endure harsh winters, resist enemies, and preserve their culture for centuries. Their strength lay not in weapons, but in the unity forged within the walls of the Longhouse. The architecture of their dwellings did not simply reflect their worldview, but actively shaped it. It taught them to share, to negotiate, and to live in harmony with dozens of other people. It was the foundation upon which their entire civilization was built. What if everything you've been taught about walking is wrong? For indigenous warriors and hunters, the ability to move silently was a matter of life and death. Their gait was not just a means of transportation, but a true art that allowed them to glide through the forest without leaving a trace or making a sound. The basis of this technique was soft footwear, moccasins. Their thin deerskin soles allowed them to feel every branch and every stone underfoot. This made it possible to avoid noise and choose the safest footing for the next step. Unlike Europeans who walk from heel to toe, the indigenous people placed their feet differently. They landed on the outside of the ball of their foot and then smoothly rolled their weight onto the entire foot. This step was soft, springy, and virtually silent. The movement was slow and deliberate. Before each step, the hunter carefully examined the ground, choosing a place free of dry leaves and fragile branches. He did not move in the direction that was shorter, but in the direction that was quieter. His body weight always remained on his back leg until his front leg found a secure foothold. This allowed him to freeze or change direction at any moment if there was something noisy underfoot. His balance and body control were perfected. They used the so-called fox walk, where the rear foot is placed exactly in the footprint of the front foot. This not only reduced the number of footprints left behind, but also allowed them to move along narrow paths with minimal noise. This technique required long training. While moving, the entire body was relaxed. Tense muscles create unnecessary noise and tire more quickly. They move smoothly, like water, flowing around obstacles rather than overcoming them with force. Their breathing was even and deep, synchronized with their movements. This helped them remain calm and focused. Each step was a meditation, a complete immersion in the present moment. They also knew how to use the sounds of nature to mask their footsteps. A gust of wind, the rustle of rain, or the cry of a bird. All of these could serve as cover for quick and silent movement. It was the art of being part of the surrounding soundscape. These skills were not innate, but were cultivated from childhood through games and constant practice. The ability to move quietly was as important an element of education as the ability to shoot a bow and arrow. How difficult do you think it would be for a modern person to master such a technique? But moving quietly is one thing. How did they survive when nature itself froze in the dead grip of winter? In the next chapter, you will learn how they preserved the gifts of summer to survive the harshest blizzards. Success in surviving a harsh climate depended largely on the ability to preserve summer surplus. Indigenous peoples were masters of preservation, using simple and ingenious methods that required neither salt nor complex technology. Their pantry was nature itself. One of the main methods was drying. Meat, fish, berries, and edible roots were laid out in the sun or hung in the shade in the wind. Dehydrated products lost weight but retained all their nutritional properties and could be stored for a very long time. Smoking was widely used in forest regions. The smoke from certain types of trees not only preserved meat and fish, but also gave them a special flavor and repelled insects. The products were hung in special huts or simply over a slowly smoldering fire. Many tribes used natural refrigerators. They dug deep pits in the ground and lined the bottom and walls with bark and grass. In such ice pits, protected from direct sunlight, food could be stored fresh for quite a long time. In winter, the snow itself became such a storage facility. Meat or fish was simply buried in a deep snowdrift. The low temperature and lack of oxygen created ideal conditions for long-term storage. Some foods, such as nuts or acorns, required special processing. Acorns were soaked in water to remove bitter tannins, then dried and ground into flour. This flour was an important source of carbohydrates. Berries were often mixed with fat, as in pemmican, or simply dried and stored in leather bags. In winter, they were used to make nutritious drinks to compensate for the lack of vitamins. No gift of nature was wasted. Knowledge of nature's cycles was the key to successful harvesting. People knew exactly when certain berries ripened, when fish spawned, and when animals accumulated the most fat. The entire warm season was devoted to gathering and preserving food. This system allowed them to survive long and hungry winters when hunting was difficult and plant food was scarce. The supplies made in the summer were a guarantee of survival for the entire tribe. It was strategic planning in its purest form. Thrift and foresight were not just personal qualities, but the basis of collective security. Everyone contributed to the creation of common supplies. Everyone's life depended on it. Ready for the shocking truth about real democracy? While European monarchs ruled alone, many indigenous peoples practiced a complex system of governance based on consensus. Their councils around the fire were not places for orders, but forums where everyone's opinion was valued. The center of political life was the tribal council, which included chiefs, elders, and respected warriors. However, their power was not absolute, but based on authority and wisdom. They could not command, but they could persuade. The decision-making process was long and thorough. Each member of the council had the right to express their opinion on the issue under discussion, whether it was a declaration of war, the conclusion of peace, or migration to new lands. They spoke in turn, without interrupting each other. The goal of the discussion was not to find a compromise, but to reach complete agreement, consensus. It was believed that a decision not supported by everyone would be weak and bring misfortune. Therefore, debates could last for hours and sometimes days. Speakers used not the power of their voices, but the power of arguments, parables, and references to the experience of their ancestors. The ability to speak beautifully and convincingly was highly valued. The elders, who possessed the greatest wisdom, often had the final say. If someone strongly disagreed with the general opinion, they were not forced to comply. They could simply refuse to participate in a particular expedition. This was the highest form of respect for personal freedom. This system required enormous patience and respect for other people's points of view. It taught people to listen and hear, to look not for what divides, but for what unites. It was the art of leadership without coercion. This approach ensured that the decision made would be supported by the entire tribe. Everyone felt involved and responsible for the common destiny. This created incredible cohesion in society. Even the most important issues were decided not in the silence of offices, but openly around a common fire. Anyone could come and listen to the speeches of the leaders. It was true popular democracy in action. This model teaches us that the true power of a leader lies not in the ability to give orders, but in the ability to unite people around a common goal. Do you think this approach to management is possible in modern society? Decisions could save the tribe, but what saved an individual from illness? In the next chapter, you will discover the secrets of their natural pharmacy. For indigenous peoples, nature was not only their home and source of food, but also a huge pharmacy. Their knowledge of the healing properties of plants was encyclopedic and accumulated over centuries. Every shaman or healer was, in essence, a skilled pharmacist. They knew hundreds of plants and their exact uses. Willow bark, for example, was used as a fever reducer and pain reliever. Modern science later isolated salicylic acid from it, the active ingredient in aspirin. Yarrow leaves were used to stop bleeding. They were crushed and applied to the wound, which helped the blood to clot quickly. It was an indispensable first aid remedy in the field. Plantain, which we consider a weed, was a valuable medicine for them. Its leaves were used to treat burns, bites, and skin irritations. It reduced inflammation and accelerated healing. Echinacea root was used to make decoctions to strengthen the immune system and fight colds. Its effectiveness as an immunostimulant has now been confirmed by numerous studies. They had this knowledge hundreds of years before the discovery of antibiotics. The resin of coniferous trees, which has powerful antiseptic properties, served as a natural plaster. It was used to seal wounds to protect them from infection. It was a simple and effective sterile bandage. Knowledge about plants was strictly systematized. Healers knew which part of the plant to use, at what time of year to collect it, and how to prepare it correctly. An error in dosage or preparation could turn a medicine into poison. This knowledge was passed down by word of mouth, from teacher to student, and was considered sacred. The gathering of medicinal herbs was always accompanied by rituals of gratitude to the spirits of the plants. This was a manifestation of respect for the forces of nature. Their approach to treatment was comprehensive. They treated not only the body, but also the spirit, believing that many diseases stem from a disturbance of harmony with the world. Healing decoctions were often combined with chants and purification rituals. This deep connection with the plant world and understanding of its healing power is another lesson we can learn. It reminds us that nature has already created many solutions to our problems. We just need to learn to see them. In a world without writing, human memory was the most reliable repository of information. Indigenous peoples perfected the art of oral transmission of knowledge. Their stories were not just entertainment, but textbooks, maps, and archives all at once. Each tribe had its own keepers of knowledge, storytellers whose job was to memorize and pass on sacred myths, historical legends, and family genealogy. These people were held in high esteem. Their memory was the library of the entire people. The stories contained vital information about survival. Myths about the creation of the world could contain encrypted information about edible plants, animal habits, and safe routes for migration. Myths were multi-layered instructions for navigating the surrounding world. There were oral maps, long narrative songs described in detail the way to distant water sources, hunting grounds, or sacred mountains. The storyteller mentioned every prominent rock, bend in the river, or old tree, creating a detailed route in the listener's mind. Genealogical traditions, listing ancestors going back dozens of generations, were not just a list of names. They secured the clan's rights to a particular territory and established kinship ties with other tribes. It was their oral land registry and diplomatic archive. The process of knowledge transfer was strictly ritualized. Young people listened to the stories of elders during long winter evenings, memorizing them word for word. Any distortion was considered sacrilegious, as it could lead to the loss of important information. The stories were vivid and imaginative, which made them easy to remember. The use of metaphors, repetition, and song rhythms transformed dry facts into exciting narratives. It was a highly effective mnemonic technique. Thanks to this system, indigenous peoples were able to preserve and transmit vast amounts of information without a single written line. Their culture was a culture of words and memory. They proved that the human mind is the most reliable data carrier. This lesson teaches us the value of live communication and human memory in an era of digital dementia. We entrust our knowledge to external devices, risking losing everything one day. They carried their entire heritage within themselves. In a culture where mobility was the key to survival, there was no room for accumulating unnecessary things. One of the most striking symbols of this philosophy of minimalism was the travois, a simple but ingenious contraption for transporting goods. It was a means of transport that perfectly suited their way of life. The travois consisted of two long poles that were attached to the back of a dog and later to a horse. The rear ends of the poles dragged along the ground, and a net or leather platform for cargo was stretched between them. It was, in essence, the simplest of sleds. The simplicity of its design was its main advantage. A travois could be made in any conditions, using only a few poles, straps, and a knife. If it broke, it could be easily repaired with whatever was at hand. This device was ideally suited for traveling across the rugged terrain of the Great Plains. Unlike a wheeled cart, the travois could easily navigate narrow trails, forests, and shallow rivers. Its passability was phenomenal. The travois had sufficient load capacity to carry everything necessary for life: a dismantled tipi, utensils, and pemmican supplies. This allowed the entire camp to quickly move on and follow the bison herds. Mobility was their strategy. The philosophy of the travois was one of necessity and sufficiency. They took with them only what was truly necessary for life. The very design of the travois limited the amount of things that could be accumulated, fostering a culture of moderation. Owning a large amount of property was considered not a virtue but a burden. Wealth was measured not by how much you had, but by how much you could share with others. A person's status was determined by their generosity. This approach contrasts with modern consumer society, where we are convinced that happiness requires constantly acquiring new things. Indigenous peoples knew that true freedom lies in the absence of attachment to material things. Their wealth was in relationships, knowledge, and skills. The travois is not just a means of transportation. It is the material embodiment of the idea that lightness and mobility are more important than possession. It is a lesson in how little a person really needs to live a full life. The last and perhaps most important lesson we can learn is the principle of the seventh generation. This concept, most clearly expressed in the Great Charter of the Iroquois, was the basis of their long-term planning. It required leaders to consider the consequences of any decision for their descendants 7 generations into the future. This meant that short-term gain could never be an excuse for actions that could harm the future. Every decision, whether it was the use of resources, the formation of an alliance, or the start of a war, was evaluated in terms of its impact on the unborn. It was the highest form of responsibility. The principle compelled them to treat the land not as their property, but as a legacy they had temporarily borrowed from their children and grandchildren. They were not owners, but custodians. The goal was to pass the land on to the next generation in the same or better condition than they had received it. This philosophy fostered a deep respect for the natural balance. They understood that a deforested forest or a poisoned river was a problem not only for them, but for everyone who would come after them. This approach ruled out a predatory attitude toward resources. This applied not only to ecology, but also to social relations. Decisions that could sow discord between clans were rejected, as their consequences could poison the lives of many future generations. The goal was to create peace, not temporary advantages. Thinking 7 generations ahead means having an incredibly broad planning horizon. This is the complete opposite of the modern political and economic system, which is focused on quick profits and achieving results within a single election cycle. We are living on credit from the future. This principle teaches us that we are a part of a long chain connecting the past and the future. Our actions today create the world in which our descendants will live. This simple but profound idea could be the basis for solving many global problems. Accepting this principle requires wisdom, self-restraint, and the ability to think about the welfare of those we will never see. It challenges our selfishness and short-sightedness. But this is precisely the key to a sustainable future. Imagine what our world would look like if every government and every corporation made decisions based on this rule. Perhaps we would live in a completely different reality. This lesson from indigenous peoples is their most valuable gift to humanity. We have touched on just 9 lessons from the bottomless well of wisdom of the indigenous peoples of America. Respect for nature, the power of community, and conscious frugality. These principles were not abstract ideas for them, but daily practices, the key to survival. They remind us that humans are not the crown of creation, but only one thread in the complex web of life. Their knowledge is not a relic of the past, but a compass for the future. In a world facing ecological crises and social disconnection, their philosophy can show us the way to a more harmonious and sustainable existence. We just need to learn to listen to the voices of those who lived on this earth long before us. What other topics related to the life and culture of indigenous peoples would you like to see on our channel? Share your ideas in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next explorations of the wisdom of ancient cultures.